Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event on the Green Free Market Transformation. I'm Cristina Talaco, the Chair of Coalition Conservation. We are a not-for-profit that advocates for economically viable and market-based solutions to tackle climate change in line with conservative values. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, paying my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, tonight's event is brought to you by our youth arm, the Youth for Conservation, or Y4C, which is formed by a very passionate group of young people who care about the environment. Y4C has been mobilizing young people around Australia and also overseas to close the ideological gap in the environmental movement, and they're promoting bipartisan action. The need to include youth voices in the climate debate has become very pressing at the moment, as young people whose futures are threatened by accelerating global heating are increasingly demanding action towards a more just, equitable, and a climate resilient society. So I'd like to thank Y4C and its chair, Riley Taylor, for their hard work. And before I actually hand over to Riley, I would also like to thank our speakers tonight, New South Wales Minister for Energy and Environment, Matt Kean, and our C4C Director in WA, Tamara Dempsey. She's also with Fortescue in hydrogen. Matt has been a great supporter of our work. And as we all know, he's achieved somehow legendary status when it comes to protecting the environment. He's been a champion, especially amongst the youth, as a very inspiring leader in decarbonization and conservation. And I think it's because he understands very well that the transition is not only necessary for our planet, but it's also the only financially rewarding option at the moment. And he's also holding very firmly to that steering wheel to take us to net zero, building all the roads to get us there. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure now to leave you in the very capable hands of Riley, the Y4C chair, and Kean, the president of the Macquarie University's Freedom Club, and they will be moderating tonight's event.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all staying safe and well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Riley, and as Christina mentioned, I'm the chair of the Youth for Conservation group, which is the youth wing of C4C. For anyone who is unfamiliar with our organisation, I would encourage you to follow our Facebook page and to subscribe to our upcoming newsletter. What we do is we try to provide a platform for young Australians who may feel disillusioned with the extreme views offered to our demographic in this discussion. And to accomplish that, we organise events with a diverse range of speakers, including members of Parliament and also industry leaders and activists. And we regularly make submissions to parliamentary inquiries to advocate for more effective environmental policy. Now, we live in an incredibly divisive, uncertain, and frankly scary time. Everywhere we look, it seems that we are confronted by a flux of change. Whether it be global pandemics, political instability, or mounting civil disobedience, it has been easy to get swept up in what feels like a sea of bad news. Perhaps the most concerning of all recent news stories has been the report recently published by the IPCC. Whilst reiterating much of what we already know regarding the human role in climate change, we are confronted with the stark reality that this is a race against time, and that at our current pace, it may not be enough. But it's not all doom and gloom. Throughout all of this, there has been an unprecedented revolution towards technologies that are more clean and more effective. This is no longer a pipe dream. This is the future of our economy and the future of our industry. Just last month, the world's first shipment of commercially produced green steel was delivered to Swedish truck manufacturer AB Volvo, with a new fleet of green steel vehicles already being planned. Beyond manufacturing, all across the world, we are witnessing a decisive pivot towards greener energy generation, even in areas of deep economic disadvantage, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Fortescue Metals Group is leading the charge to develop the world's largest power station, which is a hydroelectric dam. Or we could look west in our own backyard to the Pilbara, where a consortium of global energy leaders are set to build the Asian Renewable Energy Hub, which will utilise our abundant solar energy to produce hydrogen and ammonia. This revolution is not driven by heavy-handed government intervention, it is driven by the free market. None of this would be possible without a strong and robust private sector. Competitive market forces are driving further innovation in this space and leading to newer and more exciting decarbonisation opportunities. However, the government still has a leadership role to play in all this. It is the government's role to ensure that the private sector is supportive and the market remains fair and competitive, and to continue signalling investments into the decarbonised future. Now, we're incredibly lucky to have a state government here in New South Wales that has pursued these objectives with the utmost effectiveness, professionalism, and transparency. And this example can also be seen in state governments in South Australia and Tasmania. The green transformation occurring in our free market has only become a more important topic in the wake of the IPCC report. We've already experienced as a country the trauma of severe weather events like the devastating Black Summer bushfires, and we have been left scarred as a nation. But by the same token, we are also uniquely placed to become global leaders in the new green economy, owing to our abundant resources to fuel new technologies, particularly renewable energy. This gives our economy the opportunity to become an export leader, particularly in the budding green hydrogen industry, to countries such as South Korea and Japan. On that note, I will now turn to introduce our speakers, and I would also like to take this opportunity to thank them again for joining us tonight. Once both speakers have made their introductory remarks, Kean Smith, the president of the Freedom Club, will begin to moderate our Q&A. If you have a question, make sure to send it in the Q&A box. If you know anyone who is unable to make it tonight, we'll be recording and uploading this to our website, and we'll send out a link. To start with, I would like to thank the Honourable Matt Kean, the Minister for Energy and Environment, for taking the time to join us tonight. The Minister has been a leading advocate within the government for energy innovation and emissions reduction, and I would now like to give him the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Riley, for your outstanding leadership to show that Conservatives should actually be conserving. And it's completely in line with our values to be looking after the environment and building a stronger and more prosperous future for our country. Could I acknowledge Kean Smith for your outstanding advocacy and leadership of Macquarie Uni Freedom Club. Freedom is a fight that we must never give up on. We know that the council culture of the far left and the anti-science agenda of the extreme right cannot be left unchecked. And I want to thank you for taking on those fights, particularly on campus. Could I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and remind everyone that the land we gathered on was, is and always will be Aboriginal land. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister's decision last week to acquire nuclear-powered submarines and forge a new trilateral security partnership is a stunning coup for Australia and all of us who love freedom. The announcement is a clear-eyed commitment to the defence and defence capability of Australia, as well as peace and stability in our region. It is also the result of generations of Australian, American and British peoples building trust and goodwill and sharing our commitment to the liberal ideals of freedom and democracy under the rule of law. Australia needs these bonds to remain strong. For the first time in most of our lives, the prevailing view that democratic and free societies, the gold standard, is under threat. In our region, the Chinese Communist Party is showcasing an authoritarian alternative to democracy, which represses citizens at home and bullies neighbours abroad. Australia should welcome a prosperous China. The rise of hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty is something that we should all celebrate. But we must also stand up for our belief in plurality, freedom, markets, and the rule of law and democracy. This is a generational challenge to democracy as the template for government. It is also a challenge that will require the collaboration and commitment of freedom-loving people, not just at the Macquarie Uni Liberal Club, but right around the world for us all to meet. Alliances with friends who share common interests and common values will be central to that endeavour. And we here in Australia have no greater friends than in the United States and United Kingdom. But the geopolitical situation is not the only challenge to our way of life. Whereas the rise of authoritarianism challenges our freedom, the changing climate challenges our way of life and our economic prosperity. Climate change is already making an impact. As Riley said, over the last 3 years, New South Wales farmers have struggled through the worst drought on record. Regional communities have had to have their water trucked in because their dams had run dry. Sydney-siders have seen their city choked in weeks of smoke. And Australians have had to run to the beach, not to enjoy the summer, but to escape bushfire. In the same way that we have a mutual interest with our friends and allies to stand up for our shared freedoms, values, and security, We have a mutual interest in jointly taking action to protect our prosperity and way of life in a changing climate. Our devastating bushfires and drought are currently being repeated in the United States and Canada, while Europe just experienced the worst floods in living memory. Earlier this year, the US intelligence community released its annual threat assessment, ascribing risks to the economy, heightened political volatility, human displacement, and new geopolitical competitions to the effects of climate change. The UN's International Panel on Climate Change has made it clear that we need to reduce our emissions to net zero by 2050, and preferably before that, to protect our planet and our way of life. Like our security situation, climate change is a global problem requiring global solutions and collaboration between friends and allies. Now, Boris Johnson and Joe Biden are from differing sides of the political aisle, but have joined forces to lift global ambitions for the decarbonisation of our planet. With Joe Biden in the White House, today, 70% of Australia's two-way trade will be with countries that aim to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We can and should join with our AUKUS friends to lead the world on climate change. Australia is one of the best placed countries to help the world decarbonise. Mining the minerals needed to build a zero carbon economy, iron ore, lithium, copper and nickel, can help drive the next Australian mining boom. We have also some of the best renewable energy resources anywhere on the planet, which can help provide our trading partners with the clean fuels like hydrogen and the materials that they will need to get to net zero emissions by 2050. One project right here in New South Wales illustrates the potential that we've got, the economic potential that is. Our first renewable energy zone in the New England was recently just released, and there were 80 registrations of interest to participate in that, totaling 34 gigawatts. That's 34,000 megawatts of new electricity generation capacity from potential renewable energy projects. That was 4 times oversubscribed of our 8 gigawatt target. This renewable energy zone is expected to deliver $10.7 billion of investment into rural and regional New South Wales, create around 830 operational jobs and 1,250 construction jobs annually, and provide landowners with billions of dollars of new income streams. This is a microcosm of the opportunity that Australia should seize at scale. We can be both a renewable energy superpower and an economic powerhouse. That's what's at stake here. Now, the next round of international climate talks in Glasgow will be in November, and they're shaping up to be a generational moment for Australia. As we've witnessed in the Prime Minister's defence of our sovereignty, our reputation matters. The international community is on a clear trajectory on climate and emissions reduction policy. Our most trusted friends and allies and AUKUS partners are leading by example. We should join them in rising to the challenge and lean into the moment to both fortify our standing as a good corporate citizen and fuel our economic prospects for the decades ahead, and help form a coalition of countries for responsible and decisive action on climate change. Doing so will reinforce that free societies are not only the path to individual liberty, but the only responsible stewards of prosperity, security, and common aspirations. In doing so, we will show that democracy and Australia is up to meeting the challenge of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Minister. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Tamara Dempsey. Tamara has been an industry leader in the commercial hydrogen space and has been working in this innovative area within Fortescue Metals Group, and has extensive experience working within the mining and renewable industries. Tamara, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Riley, and thank you, Minister. That was really fascinating to listen to, and I absolutely agree with your comments. So today, it's a pleasure to be joining you all this evening, or good afternoon, from Perth. Today, I'll be giving a little bit of an insight into what we're doing here on behalf of Fortescue Future Industries to lead the green free market transformation from an industry perspective, and what we might think the path forward looks like. So to do that, I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you can all see some lovely bright slides now. So firstly, of course, the disclaimer is the presentation does contain forward-looking statements. So Fortescue is a leader in the iron ore industry. That's what we're most well known for. We have assets, very successful iron ore assets across the Pilbara here in Western Australia. However, on our current trajectory, we're predicting to consume up to 1 billion litres of diesel per annum if no remedial action is taken. This was identified by our chairman, Andrew Forrest, many years ago, and was one of the instigators into knowing that action had to be taken now. And that situation isn't unique to Fortescue. As we know, that's across all heavy industry in consuming of diesel. So the company is actually quite young considering what we've achieved. We were founded in 2003. Fortescue became more focused on hydrogen more recently in 2018 when we announced our landmark partnership with CSIRO that is still ongoing now. And we've more recently become focused on renewable green hydrogen, as we believe it's the cleanest source of energy in the world and has the potential to replace up to 3/4 of global emissions if we improve the technology we currently have globally and have the ability to scale hydrogen commercially. So at Fortescue, we're currently advancing projects across Australia, including in the Pilbara and in Tasmania, to build large-scale renewable energy and green hydrogen production capacity. In addition to this, we're also assessing a portfolio of different types of renewable energies, such as hydropower, geothermal power, wind and solar assets all around the world. Already, Fortescue has identified projects in renewable energy and green hydrogen projects that could lead to up to 300 gigawatts of power. So that's an absolutely phenomenal number. It's categorically what we need to actually lead this transformation in energy. So at Fortescue, we believe that the major steel, truck, train, ship and mobile plant industries can be operated with renewable, environmentally friendly energy. There's no need for them to be operated under diesel. Our green team has been successful in actually testing combustion of ammonia in locomotive fuel with a pathway to achieve completely renewable green fuel in trains, in large trains that we're using across the Pilbara and of course are used all over the world. We have also completed the design and construction of a combustion testing device for large ship engines with pilot test work underway and a pathway to achieve completely renewable green shipping fuel, which is a phenomenal achievement. Our team has also finalised the design of a next generation ore carrier that will consume renewable green ammonia and has been successfully testing battery cells that will be used on Fortescue haul trucks as well. In addition to this, we've designed and constructed a hydrogen powered haul truck for technology demonstration and there's systems testing underway. If you actually have a look on our LinkedIn page today, there's a beautiful photo of it. Our team has designed and constructed a hydrogen powered drill rig, which is used throughout mining in Australia and around the world for technology demonstrations, and systems testing for this is actually underway as well. And finally, we celebrated successful production of high purity green iron ore, and high purity is more than 97% purity, so extremely high, from Fortescue ores. And that was done at low temperature in a continuous flow process. So these initiatives, they're just the examples of some of the things we're working on here at Fortescue. And they've all been tested using commercial scale equipment to prove that the demand for direct green electricity, green hydrogen and green ammonia could one day be as large as the fossil fuel industry, so we believe. And there's just a few of our stats there. Very impressive. But this isn't just an Australian-centric mission, although we believe Australia can certainly lead it. So Fortescue, through FFI, Fortescue Future Industries, is studying and optimising a portfolio of hydropower, geothermal, wind and solar resources all around the world. As you can see on the map, we've got sites targeted in North America, Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, Africa, Central Asia, Russia, Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand. And as highlighted earlier, that even includes the DRC, which is one of the potentially largest projects globally. So our vision is very ambitious, which is the Fortescue way, is to make green hydrogen the most traded seaborne energy commodity in the world. So our aim is to actually produce over 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen by 2030, which is not that far away. So what does the future actually look like? Zero emissions energy needs to be available at an industrial global scale and at a price that's competitive with fossil fuels. That's the reality. Our vision is to make renewable green hydrogen, as that's what we said, the most globally traded seaborne energy commodity in the world. We know there's many key markets for green hydrogen in the coming decade, and we see that as a really exciting opportunity for us to participate in being at the forefront of developing that export market, as well as decarbonising our own assets here at home. And I'll hand back over to Riley.
Thank you for that. I will actually hand over now to Kean to moderate the Q&A.
All right, so after a nice little farrago of handovers, we're straight into the cross-examination. Look, before we do, I thought we'd just quickly go through the sort of simple question about, well, it's not really simple, but a question about hydrogen. So in 2003, George Bush, of all people, came out with a $1.5 billion plan for the development of hydrogen energy. So I guess the crux of this question for both of our panelists here is, there actually has been quite a long history of hydrogen being touted as a future energy source. What has sort of conduced the change that has turned this from being talk to being something that is tangible? I mean, obviously, with what Tamara just said, there's immense commercial potential. So what are the factors that have changed that over the past 10 to 15 years?
Tamara, do you want me to have a shot at that?
Oh, sure, Minister, please.
So I think, firstly, obviously, the move towards net zero has turbocharged the move towards hydrogen. So as I said, 70% of Australia's two-way trade has committed to net zero emissions. 50% of the world's GDP is generated in countries that have committed to net zero emissions. So we know that we can use renewables to deliver clean electricity, but replacing molecules like diesel, like gas, is a lot harder, and that's where hydrogen comes in. So that's effectively stored renewables, if it's green hydrogen, that is. So I think, firstly, policy changes around the world are driving a movement towards cleaner alternative fuels like hydrogen. The second thing is the economics. The economics of hydrogen are coming down the cost curve dramatically, and it's thought that they'll be at a price point soon to be competitive with fossil fuels. It's believed that hydrogen is already cost competitive with fossil fuels for heavy vehicles. So that's heavy vehicle transport. And it's probably a couple of years off being a similar price point to using natural gas, for example. So as the technology continues to evolve around renewables, around electrolyzers, around transmission infrastructure and things like that, the cost of hydrogen will keep coming down the cost curve, and the uptake of hydrogen will come on the back of that and government policy around the globe. So I think they're the two main inputs.
Yeah, I absolutely echo those comments, Minister. What we really need to keep coming back to is hydrogen is actually the most common element in existence, and by virtue of that, there's no competitor technology-wise that can replace or even rival hydrogen as being our potential partner in managing this energy transition. What's really changed, I think, hydrogen is not new. The Haber-Bosch method that's used in electrolyzers for the production of hydrogen has been around for an exceptionally long time. But what's certainly changed, in addition to the policy, as the Minister outlined, is the technologies to actually scale hydrogen. And as that is bringing down the cost, the technologies and the methods and the ability to bring that across continents through sea travel, through all sorts of those different methods that I just outlined that we're looking at doing now in very recent adjustments to heavy industry, is making hydrogen much more accessible in ways that it previously wasn't.
Yeah, very good. And I guess building off that particular question, what sort of role does hydrogen have to play in decarbonising the steel industry? Because obviously there's been some advances in that area. Maybe, Tamara, you could elaborate on that more with the work that Fortescue and our good friend Twiggy has been up to with that.
Absolutely. Well, there's different parts of that question, actually. So green steel as one commodity in itself, as I said, we've been trialling at Fortescue very successfully in creating green steel at purities of above that 97th percentile. So there's the creation of green steel, and then there's the support of the heavy industry that actually surrounds green steel. So the factories that are producing it, the shipping channels that support it, both to and fro. And hydrogen we see as playing a critical part in that, because as I also highlighted with the potential of 1 billion litres production in diesel, the production of steel in the iron ore context is one of our major producers of carbon. So if we're working at it from both ends, if we're decarbonising our operations, so we're not creating the emissions in the first place, and then on the other end as well, so when we're actually creating the steel, we're creating a green steel product, then it's win-win.
Kean, could I just jump in as well and say that there is a pathway to create green steel using hydrogen. It's kind of hasn't been proved up at scale yet, but there are a lot of people looking at that. And let me tell you why that's so important. Steel manufacturing in New South Wales is the lifeblood of the Illawarra. So the BlueScope smelter down there is home to about 2,000 jobs. That's direct jobs. And then you've got all the spin-off industries that rely on that steel manufacturer down there. So in a world where the steel price is very competitive, if you're looking at, if those big markets that purchase our steel and underwrite the prosperity of that region are starting to put in place carbon tariffs, for example, then that will potentially see the closure of the steel industry in New South Wales, and that will be devastating for the Illawarra. So what we as policymakers need to do is identify that risk to those industries and those communities, and we know that carbon is a huge risk to the Illawarra, to the Hunter, and to many of our energy-intensive industries in Australia. What we need to do is support those industries to move to a cleaner product so that they can continue to sell those materials at a competitive price into those markets like the US, like the EU, like the UK, like Japan and South Korea. Otherwise, that will come at the expense of our prosperity, of thousands of jobs, and will impact whole communities that, if the policy settings aren't right, could never recover. We're not taking that risk here in New South Wales. We've got a plan to be able to create green hydrogen here. That will be our focus. We'll release our hydrogen strategy very quickly. We've got a plan to support the transition of our heavy industry like BlueScope to provide green products, to ensure that we safeguard those businesses in a very quickly changing world. The Industry and Innovation Fund, a $750 million fund that I've set up, is designed to support BlueScope transition to a green future and safeguard those jobs and safeguard those communities. And that's on the back, that's their Scope 1 emissions. Their Scope 2 emissions, which are basically the emissions through the electricity they generate off-site. We've got a plan to completely decarbonise our grid if we need to by 2030, and that's the Energy and Infrastructure Roadmap. Again, it's not just about greening the grid, it's also delivering cheaper and more reliable power. So you can see how all those inputs are going in to safeguard, traditionally dirty or heavy industry in New South Wales, helping them be green and helping them compete in that new world which they'll be required to operate.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the next question that we've got that builds off, I guess, the hydrogen question more broadly is what are the sort of, and this is from Richard Lange, what sort of green hydrogen export opportunities have we got to our neighbours in Southeast Asia? Are there any particular ones that stand out at the moment? Probably Tamara first.
Yeah, absolutely. So right across Southeast Asia, you would have seen through the press that each country has made very ambitious and really excellent declarations of their goals for transitioning their own countries across to net zero, and hydrogen as being largely the carrier for doing that. Just as an example, Japan, South Korea and China have all pledged together almost 8 million hydrogen fuel cell cars to be on the road. So that's on a very domestic sort of residential aspect and totally separate to the industrial scale that they're also committing to. So there's fantastic opportunities for take up all through Southeast Asia.
Yeah, Kean, I mean, this is a big focus of me. I mean, 3 of Australia's top 4 trading partners, Japan, the Republic of Korea and China, have all made clear commitments to use clean hydrogen to decarbonise their energy systems. It's gaining interest in Europe. I was just on the phone with the German Minister for the Environment this afternoon. They're putting €1 trillion down to try and kickstart the hydrogen economy. They see that as really important. The beauty of us in Australia is that we've got all the inputs to be able to meet the world's hydrogen needs. We've got an abundance of cheap land, which you can cover with renewables. That's critically important because renewables at scale gets the electricity prices down to almost zero to ensure you can do those energy intensive processes like creating hydrogen through electrolysis. So the only way you can do cost-effective hydrogen to compete and sell into those international markets is if you have cheap renewables, and we can do it in abundance here. We're doing it in New South Wales. We know that there are huge opportunities emerging, not just internationally, but in industries like around shipping, steel making, chemical production, that see hydrogen as a long-term alternative to their dependence on fossil fuels. Those markets will emerge around the 2030s, but you can't just deliver the product overnight. You've got to start now to scale up the industry if you want to grab those remarkable opportunities. We know that the costs are coming down. So to make a hydrogen fuel cell, the cost of that has fallen by about 60% since about 2006. And with foreseeable technology improvements and high manufacturing volumes, it's anticipated that the cost will continue to fall. So that's the technology that everyone will be able to do. What they won't be able to do is have the electricity generated at the low prices that we can because of our energy, our abundance of renewables, which gives us a competitive advantage. So these markets will be opening up. They'll be huge. It's forecast they'll be bigger than LNG and coal exports that currently generate proceeds to Australia. So if we can just grab a slice of that action, we will be creating jobs, driving investment, and turbocharging the next generation's prosperity like they've never seen before. So it's too big an opportunity to miss. And these people that are going on about, renewables, we can't do it, they are basically stymieing the great chance to underwrite a wave of prosperity like we've never seen. They are crazy and we need to push past them.
Absolutely. If I can echo the Minister's comments there about the scale of the opportunity, perhaps one of the biggest barriers to that opportunity at the moment is the ability to actually transport hydrogen at scale into Southeast Asia by sea. So there's of course different carriers for hydrogen, and green ammonia is very readily transportable. But one of the newer technologies, this answers the previous question about what's making hydrogen different now compared to 30 years ago, is the ability to actually transport very dense hydrogen, such as liquid hydrogen, by sea. So it needs to be transported cryogenically at very, very low temperatures. And those technologies are coming about very recently. There's a pilot project that's underway at the moment. And once the ability to transport internationally by sea and by volume starts to open up, which the forecasts certainly are that it will in the coming years, then that again will bring another huge gateway into those markets because they just don't have the ability to produce it at scale, produce the energy at scale, because they don't have the land resources to it. So Australia is really uniquely positioned to do that.
I guess the most impressive part in all of this, of course, is people that go on about natural gas and the role that has to play. How much these sorts of technologies, like being able to compress and liquefy hydrogen for export opportunities, will have to play in the export market. Moving on to how government and the private sector can work together, we have a question from Robert Bullen saying, how have public-private project partnerships contributed to the market shift towards greener energy? So I guess it's obviously a question to start with the Minister.
Well, I think, I mean, the private sector has really led government in this space for a while now, and what's motivated them is the economics. I mean, you know, coal can't get out of bed for anything less than sort of, you know, $55 per megawatt hour. There's times of the day where renewables are producing the same electrons for zero cost. So, I mean, it's no accident that companies like AGL and Origin Energy just posted huge losses. I think AGL posted a $3 billion loss this financial reporting season. It's because their coal assets are taking water every day of the week. They're getting smashed by renewables. So the private sector is really, you know, following the market here, I guess. And the government needs to put in place the policy settings that will ensure that we do have a smooth transition. I mean, one of the great concerns I have at the moment is the existing coal-fired power stations, because they're so uneconomic that the directors or owners of those assets just say, we're going to turn them off. You know, we're not losing our shareholders' money. So they turn off their kit before we build the replacement infrastructure, then we've got a massive problem around the reliability of our electricity system. So we do need to have a mechanism whereby the private sector and the government work together to ensure that no one's left behind and that we manage this for everyone's benefit. And that's exactly what we're doing in New South Wales. We're not putting in place these policies because we're woke greenies. We're putting in place these policies because we're economically rational. We want to ensure that we deliver cheap and reliable electricity that's also clean to enable our industry to be able to compete in a very rapidly changing environment. So, of course, the private sector has a role to play, as does government, and a Liberal government should always be working with the private sector to support us building a stronger and more prosperous country.
Maybe just jumping in before we go to Tamara, do you mind, Minister, giving an example where government perhaps has worked with the private sector, particularly with that crucial area of stabilising the electricity market? Is there one where perhaps the government has been able to cooperate with the private sector to get that security? I'm thinking maybe in the field of batteries or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said in my speech, the renewable energy zones that the government has adopted as its energy policy, we've put them out to tender recently. The renewable energy zone up in the New England, we asked for 8 gigawatts of electricity, 8,000 megawatts. That's that's almost 3-4 times the size of the Liddell coal-fired power station. I know people on the call will know that. It's quite topical. So it's a lot of electricity going to the system. And we were oversubscribed 4 times. We got 34 gigawatts of interest. I mean, it's absolutely huge. Not government issuing a fiat saying, go and build this stuff, saying government said, here's the rules, you're going to have certainty. And guess what? Capital is flowing in. I mean, the 8 gigawatts alone is worth $10.7 billion. That will largely be invested in rural and regional New South Wales, creating jobs, turbocharging those economies. So the level of interest, if you multiply that by 4, $40 billion worth of private capital coming into New South Wales, what other government policy has driven that? I mean, again, this is not some socialist left-wing green agenda. This is a capitalist, pro-market, pro-business agenda. And look, the market is responding.
Anything to add, Tamara?
Yeah, for sure. It's no secret that almost every major business around the world has committed to being net zero by at least 2050, if not 2040, or even more ambitious than that, or in Fortescue's case, 2030, which is very ambitious. Governments around the world can't combat climate change alone. It needs to be an effort between industry, between government and between community, all working together to create what is effectively a whole new export market for Australia, because it will affect everybody. We see the role of government in helping private industry and vice versa, and that there needs to be that really clear and efficient approval pathway to support that investment into major projects, because without that, it slows the progress, and Australia just can't capitalise on that opportunity with the speed that we really need to.
I think that's definitely something that most people on the call would agree with, is getting rid of the red tape surrounding a lot of these projects and ensuring that there's a clear pathway to getting them rolled out is so important. Now, in terms of vehicles, are there any existing policies that maybe the Minister can elaborate on? And certainly in Tamara's case, anything that should be enacted in terms of allowing electrical or hydrogen vehicles to be rolled out both quickly and effectively in the Australian transportation sector? And that's a question from Tom Burns of Macquarie University.
Great question, Tommy. Look, we've just announced our electric vehicle strategy in New South Wales, and we think the market will probably head towards electric rather than hydrogen. That's just what the vehicle manufacturers are telling us. Our strategy would support hydrogen-fueled vehicles coming into the New South Wales market. We're not ruling it out, but the sense I get from the vehicle manufacturers, and we're talking to big right-hand drive car manufacturers out of Japan, the UK, etc., they're all moving to electric. They're betting on electric. So we're going to be prepared for an influx of those vehicles coming to the market, because that's all that's being produced. So we welcome, we know that, so for example, Hyundai is going down the hydrogen path. They're still a few years away from developing that technology at scale or rolling it out into the Australian market at scale. We'll support that if they want to go there, but it means rolling out fueling infrastructure. And right now, the availability of hydrogen, let alone the charging networks, etc., is not there. So it's probably more speculative than the EVs, which are coming with force.
If I could just build on that, electric vehicles are a little bit of a controversial topic in a lot of ways, because even though, yes, absolutely, they may produce less emissions, if they're still recharging by drawing off a grid that is powered by fossil fuels, which at the moment is what we're looking at across Australia, then ultimately they're still leaving a carbon footprint, which is what the hydrogen fuel vehicles or hydrogen cell vehicles don't do. So we see there as being a massive opportunity for hydrogen cell vehicles moving forward, both in a domestic passenger vehicle sense and also in the larger buses and larger scale vehicles. There does need to be, of course, refueling infrastructure to support that. To answer your question, Kean, of what might be holding it up at the moment, and the regulatory processes behind that as well, of course. But for example, at Fortescue, we've actually got a $32 million project on its way in the Pilbara at the moment, where we're building Australia's first zero emissions mobility at a mining operation. So we've actually got 10 Hyzon motor vehicle buses, coaches, at our own refueling station facility, which is powered by solar, which will be ferrying all of our workers to and from site at one of our mining operations, which proves that these vehicles have exceptional capabilities. Anyone who's been to the Pilbara knows it's not all sealed roads and freeways. And so in addition to passenger capabilities, hydrogen really can do everything. We just need the ability, as I said, to scale it and to refuel, and we can all drive a Mirai to work every day.
Not complete consensus on the panel here. Out of interest, a spontaneous question to do with this then, what are the key sort of areas with respect to hydrogen and transportation do we think that it will affect? Because I know, for example, in Germany, there's been a rollout of a hydrogen train, I believe, and there's been word that maybe it's more suited for heavy, large-scale transport. Could both just quickly give their opinions as to what area in transport hydrogen might be best suited for?
Absolutely. I'm going to leave that one off, Minister. We really think that hydrogen is actually suitable right across industry, from the passenger vehicles that are already in production, and certainly that production is being scaled, as I'm aware, all the way through to shipping, as I alluded to, through to heavy vehicle transport, through to the enormous haul trucks that are moving around the Pilbara, the iron ore that transports it, the freighters. Hydrogen really doesn't have any limitations in terms of vehicles. Electric vehicles, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure their batteries get pretty big and pretty heavy. So that's just another plug for hydrogen there.
We're hoping that Twiggy Forest can scale up the industry around hydrogen vehicles so that the rest of us can benefit. But right now, we think that that EVs, what the car manufacturers are betting on, and we're planning for that future. It's probably, I say that as a minister, that is the member for Hornsby. So for those living in highly densely populated areas close to the cities, electric vehicles make a lot of sense. Short journeys, you can charge them up overnight. But definitely for long-range transport, hydrogen is, I think, a more viable solution. I think Alan Finkel says that, for heavy vehicle trucking, hydrogen is already cost competitive with diesel vehicles. So we definitely see a future for hydrogen in heavy vehicles and for long-distance transport. Probably not at the right price point at the moment, but right now, battery technology for electric vehicles is competitive with internal combustion engines, and far more competitive at the moment than hydrogen, passenger vehicles. So we think that's probably more likely to take off in the short to medium term.
Yeah, very good. A quick disclosure, the Minister is an owner of a Tesla vehicle. Now, moving on. We've obviously got some very good dynamic policy going on at a New South Wales level, from abatement strategies to the work that's being done that we've heard throughout tonight, working and partnering with the private sector. I guess this is a question from an anonymous attendee, but how do we translate these excellent policies that we've got going on at New South Wales with respect to renewable policy and climate action to a national policy level? Are there particular things that we should be pushing further? And are there particular areas that, for example, for both panelists, that should be pushed particularly at a federal level that need action on?
Well,
let's go. Don't rush.
I will court controversy if I say something. So maybe Tamara can kick off and I can agree with her.
Oh, sure. I think the real impetus at the moment, we need the ability to scale hydrogen, and to do that, we need the projects to be approved, to get off the ground, to start construction and to start production. So that really, those approvals with government. So having an efficient pathway process, having the governments really supportive of the projects and enabling those projects to go ahead at scale, I think is really going to be the leader to bring along everything else that will follow in terms of the supportive industries to that.
Okay, what I'd say is that, this change is coming whether Barnaby, Matt Canavan, George Christensen and Craig Kelly like it or not. I mean, the choice is ours about whether we want to get left behind and become a rust bucket state, or we want to embrace the future and set ourselves up to be a strong, prosperous and modern economy. And I'm certainly doing everything I can to ensure that New South Wales takes full advantage of these enormous opportunities that are arising. In terms of federal government policy, I get that there are challenges. The New South Wales economy, which is largely a services-based one, is very different to the Queensland resources-rich economy and the Western Australian resources-rich economy. So the federal government has a lot more complexity when it comes to setting policies for the nation than I do, setting policies to suit that are in the best interest of New South Wales. That said, a lot of these the risks that are being brought to bear on New South Wales are also being brought to bear on Gladstone and Townsville and Port Lincoln and a whole range of places. So I would say that the federal government needs to be looking to future-proof those regions and those economies. And you can do that without putting carbon taxes in. You can do that without setting targets. And I think Angus Taylor is doing some good things. The hydrogen hubs announcement they made yesterday is all about developing that early demand for hydrogen, matching supply and demand, and helping to scale that industry in areas that are massively under threat because of the potential future drop-off in coal, the potential decline in LNG exports. So we in New South Wales, we're partnering with the federal government to develop the hydrogen industry in the Hunter and in the Illawarra, two regions massively under threat from climate change. So too does the federal government need to ensure that we keep steel making here and aluminium here and heavy manufacturing here. How do we do that? We do that by ensuring that they get access to cheap and reliable electricity, which can only come from renewables. It's cheaper than coal. It's firmed up. It's just as reliable as coal and gas. And we should be rolling out those technology at scale because we've got an abundance of it. Again, you don't need a carbon tax. You don't need a net zero target to do those things. So they're the kind of policies that a government with some political constraints could put in place that would future-proof our country and potentially set it up for success. But I don't want to just future-proof New South Wales. I want to turbocharge New South Wales. I want New South Wales to lead the world and be, the Saudi Arabia of solar, to be one of the world's leading economies in what will be a green global economy. And we're putting in place the policy settings to do that. Again, this is completely in line with our liberal values. It's completely in line with our capitalist instincts. And these people that have been standing in the way of progress and seizing this opportunity are trying to consign our country to a very bleak future. And, to those branch members that have been parroting the lines of Alan Jones and Matt Canavan, I say, get out of the way, stop holding our country back, and let's move forward for a bigger, better and brighter future.
Yeah. No, excellent words, I think, to end this call on, well, at least the Q&A section. And certainly the theme of tonight, I think, has been pretty clear that we are facing an inevitable change within the economy and the way we generate energy, whether we like it or not. And that whilst, of course, for many of us, we may like to hug bunnies and the environmental impact is, of course, an important element, there is something far beyond that. And that is that free market capitalism is leading us towards this. And whether you're a bunny hugger or you're not, you mightn't even, you might have particular sadistic tendencies, but that's not really the point. The point is that we are headed in this direction and that actually prosperity, economic growth, and indeed our entire future depends on it. So I'm going to hand over to the President of the New South Wales Young Liberals, our final handover of the night, to give a vote of thanks for the speakers and for the call.
Thanks, Kean, and thank you to Riley for inviting me to do the vote of thanks tonight. Minister Kean and Tamara, thank you so much for your insight and for continuing to push the dial. Matt, through the public sector, speaking up when others won't or don't, and pursuing policy reform in New South Wales unapologetically and with a steely focus for your vision to turbocharge New South Wales. Tamara, showing leadership in the private sector, giving government the confidence to put in place these policy settings that the population and consumers have long been calling for. Thank you also to Riley, Kean and Christina for your role in bridging the business and the government sectors and the older and the younger generations. Forums such as these really help deepen our understanding of how expansive the climate debate is and all the levers that are available at our disposal today, which may or may not be available if we delay too long. So you are all doing a phenomenal job and we thank you for your contribution and for sharing with us tonight.
Now.